How's it going today? My bad. I have my chat on my phone this time, and so it'll be easier for me to keep up with chat as it comes in. How you guys doing today? Hello, Paper. Thanks for being here. Beautiful Thursday. I almost said Wednesday. Things have been pretty chill this morning. I surprisingly stayed up until 3 a.m. in the morning, which is really out of the ordinary for me because I normally sleep early. I couldn't fall asleep last night. Thankfully I'm doing okay. I still have a lot of energy. I have my sparkling watermelon juice. Hello Outcast, how's it going today? This stuff only has 12 grams of sugar. Pretty good. So it's not like a soda that has 20 to 30 grams of sugar. Hi Frag. So as you guys can see, this is my desk. This is where I've been doing a lot of my crafting on. You may see some little scuffs on the table, but honestly, it's a part of the process. It's just gonna happen when you're working with acrylic paints, glues, stuff like that. I'll get you guys acquainted with the little desk setup. So the camera is right here. It's on a little stand. I'm sitting towards the back here. My desk is actually at an angle, so that means there's a lot of space out to the sides of me. So I actually have my fabric over on the right hand side. The left hand side doesn't have anything just because I don't wanna elbow and knock anything over. Before I continue, as you see on the bottom here, stickers by remmuru. I put that there because I put their stickers on my little toolkit box. And so if you ever wonder who made these stickers and where you can buy them, go check out remmuru on Twitter. I'll go ahead and tag them later in the stream too. That way it'll be easy to find them. Yeah, I have my mic over here. So I was testing out my audio earlier. Hello Miss Fizz, welcome. And it turned out that the mic does pick up on the sewing machine, and I don't know why it didn't pick up before and it's picking it up now. So I tried to put it at a distance where it won't pick up the sewing machine as much. When I have the sewing machine later, I'm gonna try and see if I can use it while the mic is still on. If it's not gonna be too distracting, then we'll keep it, but if it ends up being really distracting, then we'll just go ahead and get rid of it. Krisu, thank you. Thank you for stopping by. Yeah, this is my little business card. I made like 200 of these at the time. I designed the little logo, the PastelSoni. So Sonico was my name at the time, but then I shortened it to PastelSoni. I still use these cards because there's no point in throwing them away. I just truncated my name a little bit. Maybe I should just go through and in black permanent marker just cross out the stucco at the end. That was definitely an option, but then I'm like, maybe that's not the best thing to do. If you look a little closer, I have it's a little blurry. I have a little sea bunny right here. I think that's really cute. Also, I have a different fugi. I think for the time being, I want to try to change up my fugi every day. I really like the way this one looks. It's sort of... Oh! Thank you. How's that? I turned it down a little bit. Is that a little better? Actually, because So I have my phone right here with chat, and then I can also see chat on screen. Maybe I'll just turn off my phone and then just use this, because it's not like I'm switching between different windows. So save a little battery. Alrighty. And then my drawer full of just all my fabrics. Okay, perfect. Thank you, Krisu. Yeah, let me know if it's still a little loud and I'll turn it down. Definitely not a problem for sure. So my monitor is right in front up here, and so I can see you guys right here. Thank you, Sam. I have a little, okay, cool. Thanks, Frag. So I have a little shelf over here. I don't want to pull it out because it's a little messy, but I have an assortment of pens, stickers, just anything that I might need to use extra paper. And then if I ever need anything, again, there's a shelf here over to my right hand side. So I try to make it so everything is within distance, reaching distance. Yeah, so now that we talked about the desk, let's go over our materials for today. Bam! So we have 3 different colors. Actually, technically 4. I had already made some pieces. Actually, I don't remember how many I made. But Petra Gurin from Nijisanji EN, she will be the next person I will be making a mask for. As you guys might have seen on Twitter, I have already made Lazulight, and then I made both Rosemi and Selene from Obsidia. So now I will be making Petra, and her colors are just like my t-shirt. Her colors are orange, black, white, and then a little bit of blue, like that. Oops, oopsie, those are the pieces there. I'm gonna go ahead and pull out the little fishies I've already made. What's nice is I won't have to make them later on, and the process for these can get a little tedious, and I'll describe them more in the future. But we have little guppies that we will be putting on the mask. Let's go into design. So I'm going to set this fabric aside and we will see them again. There. So this is my vision for, yeah, this won't be orange, it'll be more like a pink, but hopefully it'll still get the image across. And then we have blue, black, and let's use, I guess we'll just use my pen for white. So a mask base, I typically draw it like this. So it's a little more simplified, where the bottom sometimes comes out to a point to the chin, or sometimes it goes in just to fit the face a little better. But for simplicity's sake, that's why I drew a mask right here. This is the top where the nose goes, and this is where the chin goes. So that's orientation. And what I plan to do for this is, you know, I should bring up a reference photo of Petra. It's like this so I'm not reaching anymore. Folder name references. Put Petra in there, and then let's go ahead and bring her up on OBS. I'm glad to see you guys are excited for Petra. Image. References. Yeah! Alright, she is really big right now, so I'm gonna shrink her down. Yeah, it'll be fine just leaving her in the corner. I don't really need to show my mic or anything, so let's put her in here and block her out. Alrighty, so if you look at her original design, she has this seifuku because she's a student, and so I thought that would be a really interesting pattern to try to recreate. So when I look at a liver, I try to think about or identify the pattern that screams like this is distinctly that. Actually, I can go ahead and upload another photo. I actually didn't think about showing these earlier. I'm sorry, you guys will have to wait for it. I put this on the PowerPoint. I would just take out one of the masks that I've made, but I don't have any more rosary masks. Maybe I can draw it out instead. I might take a little bit. So what I did for Rosemary, let's use a separate piece of scratch paper for this. So like this. So I have her base mask, and her base mask is pink, and then I did a little rose that was red. So you have a base rose, and then I cut out little pieces and then top stitch them like this to give more of a rose appearance. And then afterwards I took a different fabric. I sewed on, I believe it was just one piece, like one piece of leaf. I top stitched that. And then I tried to replicate her thorns by using a specialized stitch that allows me to make it look more thorny, and I would put that on the bottom. And so when I look at this design, I think of you have her main colors, so it's the pink, that's the base. You have the rose, that's a darker red. You have the green to add a little splash of color to accentuate that this is floral. And then you have the brown. I don't have a brown marker, so that's why this is not, should I hold this up? That's why this is not brown. But I represented the thorns. And so when you look at Rosemary, when you see her face, one of the first things you see is the rose. So that's why I picked out this particular image. I will bring out the Selene mask right now. Selene's mask is really easy to identify, like the most notable point of her outfit. Faces are always really easy to identify. So here in the Selene mask, this is the part of her hood. You have the two closed eyes, the nose, and then the mouth. So the mouth has jagged teeth on the bottom. It has these two little fangs up top, and in the ears, like when you look at this, you could clearly tell it's a bear. You might not be able to tell it's a polar bear, but it's a bear. And so having a distinctive design is really important for mask aesthetics, because you want someone to be able to look at it. You want someone to be able to look at it and be like, okay, I know who that is. So Petra, other than the little fish on her head and maybe the stripes of her uniform, it'll be hard to incorporate a design onto a mask, because like she has like her little penguin flippers with her jacket, but that's not something I can do on a mask because the mask is 2D, and the penguin flippers, like if you actually have her jacket, Krisu, I'm pretty sure you have this jacket, you can like, hi Taro, welcome. You can like stick your hands in it and then it's like a 3-dimensional shape. But I need something 2-dimensional on here, and it would feel weird just to put like an edge of a fin right here on the mask, because if I just have that image, it doesn't indicate anything else about her design. And so what I am deciding on doing is using her two primary colors. So it is it's more like a grayish black. It's not an entire like pitch black. So this black isn't black, completely black. If you look at my t-shirt, this is completely black. This is more of a gray. And so maybe start. I have a gray marker here. So I think what'll look really good is having the bright color first. So I want to do 2 different strips along this mask. So 1 orange and 1 gray. So something like this. Have the rest of the mask bare, and then have a little fishy here on the bottom, like that. So then when you look at the mask, you tell, oh, this is a seifuku. Oh, these are Petra's colors, and there's a fish that definitely has to be Petra. So now the difficult part is determining, how do I want to orient these stripes? Do I want them to be floating individually in the mask? So if we have 2 different strips like this, 1 and 2. Because then if I were to do something like this, it would look like the cuff of a sleeve. But there's just something that looks a little awkward about having this not at the very top of the mask. It's like the design starts here instead of at the very top. So then what if we put this stripe all the way at the top? And then the second stripe, the next question is, do I put it directly below or do I leave a space? And I'm thinking it'd be good to leave a space. So then it gives off the impression that this is like the edge of a cuff, if you get what I mean. The design starts at the top, and so it's a little more seamless. If you were to do something like this, it's a little hard to tell like what piece of clothing this is referencing. But because it's a seifuku and has very specific lines, I think having 2 lines like this would really help. And then you'd have the fish on the bottom. I have tried making this mask twice already. Let me find my previous revisions, and I will talk about why I didn't like them, why they didn't work. If I can find them. I should have looked for these sooner. I'm not gonna lie. You know what? I'll be right back. I might have put them in the closet. Duh. Alright, so it's in the top drawer. So these are the masks that I have currently. Hinata Ryuko. I chose the 2 flowers on the edge of her design, her base color, aqua for the bottom, and then a crown. So that when you look at this, you can start putting the pieces together. Like, oh, who has a crown and 2 flowers? That's to be Hinata. This is a Mista mask that I make. So this, actually, after making this, I was inspired to make the Solenbear mask after I saw her outfit come out. And I thought about making more of these for mistakes. But considering his wishes were to just sort of disappear, I didn't want to continue on any of that. So here we go. These are 2 previous renditions of Petra mask that I've done in the past. So I'll explain what we got going on here. So you have a really big black stripe and a really big orange stripe. And now that I'm looking at this, I might actually switch these colors because I think the black and then the orange looks really good. If it was the other way around, I don't know. Maybe it seems a little bit, thank you paper. Maybe it seems a little bit upside down. So like if we were to do something like this, the orange and then the black. That's actually something to think about because I did the, sorry, I should say gray. I did the gray first and then the orange because if you look at her hood, the first thing you see is the gray. So then the gray would be more distinctive and then you get, it's like the orange is more of a highlight than a main color. But I'll cut them out and then we'll place them on the mask to see how they work. So then you can see the colors, you can see the little fishy on the bottom. I actually top stitch a little face in there, a little eyeball and then a mouth because I thought that was cute. So the first thing that I noticed when making this mask is that it's very stiff. So if you look at this one has a little more flexibility. I can sort of scrunch it, I can pull it here, but here it's like one solid mass. And what I did for this mask is that I use an applique process. So applique is when you use a specialized, so this is what the glue looks like. So the glue itself is actually clear and web-like. It is just covered in 2 pieces of wax paper. So you have this top paper that has a grid on it so that you can measure out exactly how much you want to cut. You can draw on it to make sure your designs are even. And then on the back side is just regular wax paper. So I'll peel open a little bit of it for you guys. I don't know if this is actually going to come off. Let's find out. Oh yeah, okay. So if you can see, there's a little sheet in here, and it's a little transparent because it's just a web of glue. So when you iron it down to one side of the fabric, it'll stay on, and then when you iron that fabric onto something else, then it'll stay on as well. So even though it is one sheet of glue, it is activated by heat, so it'll glue to whatever you have it on. So what I did first, I took the gray, I put the applique glue on here, and then I ironed it. So I iron it this way, I take out the sheet on the back. So then the glue is now primed on this fabric. And then what I do is I then take this gray fabric and then put it on the white like a sandwich. So the glue is in the middle. So that's why this mask is so stiff. It's a little crunchy. I don't know if you can hear it. But because I glued down the fabric onto here, it is really thick. So I didn't do applique for this. Okay. So most of my masks, they're only 2 layers thick. So 1 and 2. Some masks have a 3rd layer to provide more protection. But honestly, if you do that with cloth masks, then it becomes really hard to breathe through it. And so what I want to try to do is reduce the amount of bulk on the mask as much as possible so that it's still pretty breathable. So this would be really uncomfortable to wear because it'll just make you really sweaty. Because you can see I could pull out the 2nd layer here, but on the front layer there's 2 layers of fabric, and the only place there would be really airflow would be on the bottom down here, not up here by your nose. And so I did the same thing for the bottom. So that's why if we turn it this way, you can see how flat this is and how firm this is compared to how thin and how pliable this is right here. And so I don't want to replicate this. I do like what I was going for. Applying the fabric as applique is a really good idea because I tried doing it without it. So what happens when you don't do the applique on a sheet of fabric on top of another sheet of fabric, you get this puckering right here. There's just this space in between the top fabric and the base fabric, and especially if you're wearing it, it can have a lot of wrinkles in it like this. So if you look at how like flat this is, there are no really large wrinkles. There's slight little ruffles on it, but this, the whole thing right here is just all wrinkled, and so I don't want that. The one thing that I improved upon this mask versus this mask is that I made the stripes smaller, and I left a little bit of white in between the two colors, so this looks much less like a flag. But the difficulty with this one is that when I was trying to put the fabric on, I didn't make sure, because there is no applique, that there is no way to hold the fabric down except for when I was pinning it. When I sewed it, it didn't come out even the entire way. So this mask, I consider, like, I'm more frustrated about this mask than I am about this mask, because this mask is just ugly. Like, if you look at it, it's not stably sound. If you look, you always want your lines to be clean. So the line's really clean over here, and then it shrinks in diameter over here just because I didn't align it properly. So if we use a ruler, this is about 2 centimeters right here, and then it started off as 3 centimeters. So I lost a centimeter of space because I wasn't able to align it properly on the mask. I will say that sewing on top of a rounded object, convex object, is definitely more difficult than sewing on a flat sheet of fabric. And I will show an example. So here I already made 2 pieces of a mask. And I will show you guys how to do that later on, but for the sake of this explanation, I'm gonna flip this inside out. So this right here would be the piece of fabric that we would work on top of for the front of the mask. It doesn't matter which one you choose as long as you keep it consistent. So if I turn it onto the side, you can see it has a very big curve to it, which makes it difficult to try to figure out how to put a straight line on here. So yeah, that's the basics of it. That's what we're going to be trying to do today. Really just creating a thin line of black fabric, a thin line of orange fabric, putting applique in the middle of it, and then pasting it onto a mask. Let me go ahead and take a sip of water. Take a little break because I ain't been talking straight for almost 30 minutes. I should look for my mask template. Well, actually, no need. I was gonna cut out more of these masks on stream, but honestly, I might do that another time just because the focus of today is trying to figure out the design. Give me a second to... I think I am gonna pull up YouTube on my phone. There we go. Alrighty. So, the first thing I'm gonna do is measure how thick I want the lines to be. So if this is 3 centimeters, this is 2 centimeters, I think I might want to go for 1.5 centimeters. So that would be not here, but here. I think I could go a little thinner than that, honestly, and maybe instead of centimeters we could do it in inches. So maybe 1/2 inch would be a really good size. One thing that you always need when you're sewing is something called seam allowance. So I can draw a little bit of a diagram here. So let's say you're making a pocket with curves. This is the top of the pocket. There we go. This is the top of the pocket, and then this is the bottom of the pocket. So if you were to cut out the pocket just within this area perfectly, when you sew it, you can't sew directly on the sides of the fabric because then it's going to come out. So in order to have a seam, like here, it's a little hard to see because it's white on white, but if you can see there's a little indent here. That is really hard to see. That is the seam. And this little piece, let me do this. There we go. This little piece right on here, right on top of the seam line, that's seam allowance. So that when I am making a pocket, I can get this size by sewing along, by marking that this is the size that I want, and then leaving a little bit of fabric along the edges so that I can sew at the desired length right here. Because let's say I were to sew, let's say if I were to cut out this shape to be exactly what I wanted, I would have to sew into the fabric, which would make it smaller than what I originally intended. No, thank you, Creation. Welcome. So when I'm trying to make this stripe, it could be 1/2 inch. 1/2 inch here, but it would need to be a little bit longer than that, so maybe 3/4 of an inch, because I'm going to need about like about a 1/4 inch seam allowance on both sides of the fabric. You know, there's something that I also realized. I can't just cut out a horizontal stripe because the mask is curved. If you can see here, it actually goes up to the nose bridge and then it comes back down. Especially if I want the stripe to be along the edge of the mask here, it has to follow this curve. And so this is something that I struggled with before, trying to match the curves and then keeping the width of the line consistent throughout the entire mask. So let's see if we can figure that out. I think the best way to do it, yep, you're right, Fryer, it really does go hard. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna use this mask as a template. So if this gray fabric, I'm just gonna say both, is gonna run along the top, then it would make sense to use this as a template to trace. So we're also going to be experimenting during this. It might not work the first time, so we'll just have to try again. That's the thing with making more complex designs, is that it just takes a lot of trial and error, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't. You clearly see that I've tried it twice already, and neither were really successful, or at least the way that I wanted it. So that's why I'm trying again. Sometimes it could be really discouraging when you don't get it the first time. Or even the second time, which is why I've been sort of scared to touch Petra's mask for a long time. But I think especially because I said, I'm going to stream this today, I just mentally prepared myself and be like, okay, we're going to do this. So I'm going to grab my chalk. This is a tiny piece of chalk. It actually belongs to a larger triangular shaped chalk, but before I took it home, I broke it. Unfortunate. So I just use little shards of chalk to do my little designs. The benefits of using chalk on fabric is that it will come off when you wash it. So that's why chalk was like Taylor's chalk was just the #1 choice. They now have pens that are dissolvable in water. Those are more expensive than chalk, so I'm just like, I'm not gonna pay more for that, so we're just gonna use chalk. Alrighty, and whenever I make a project, I try to conserve as much fabric as possible. Just because I want to get fabric is not cheap, and so if I can use it to the fullest, then I will make sure I use my money's worth. So I'm folding the fabric in half because the mask is double-sided. So if I were to just do it one-sided on this side, then I would need to have another piece. But the advantageous part about folding your original fabric in half is that it'll be connected by this point right here. So the fabric opens up here and then is connected on this end. If I were to just trace one end of it here, I would have to then flip this over and then trace it on the other side, but that doesn't make sense because this is supposed to be symmetrical anyways. So I'm just gonna fold it in half. You want to make sure the inner, oh, there is no inner. I'm used to doing like four folds. So I place the mask template right on top here. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna align this edge directly on the fold line here, so that when I open this, this is backwards because I want it to connect to a point at the top here and I want it to end here. I actually have to flip this over. Ooh, I'm glad I caught that. So then I'm gonna place the edge on this side and I'm gonna have the tip of the fabric coming up this way. But now that poses a new problem. Do I stop here at the tip of the mask or do I continue? If you look at this mask right here, this mask doesn't have a tip of the mask anymore. It doesn't have a nose bridge. Because I had glued it and like sewed it shut to the mask, the nose bridge is no longer a thing. And so this one actually has a bit of a nose bridge. I did a good job of following the curve of the mask here, finishing it somewhere, and then continuing it down the other end. But I don't remember if I just stopped it at the tip of the mask here or I continued it. If I think about seam allowance, I think I would need to continue it upward and then have it come down this way, so that when I am folding the seam allowance would then go behind this part of the mask. That might make a little more sense later as we do it. So. Okay, let me think about it. So if it starts here, it comes up here and it ends right here. So let's just trace this. So I'm gonna try to bring this up as far as possible. I don't think I'm gonna need too much room at the top, which is why I'm sticking it really close to the edge. But oh, you know what? I actually have a chalk pencil. This is actually Japanese, and it's very nice. It's really good for making some fine lines. Will it show though? You can sort of see it through the camera. It shows very faint. The thing about this chalk pencil is that I really need to like scrape the chalk onto the fabric in order to have it be seen. Alrighty. So if I remove the fabric, you can see I have the faint outline of a mask right here. If I were actually, okay, let's do this first. So this is 1 centimeter. I think we decided to go inches. So if I have 1/2 inch, if I start here and the edge of the fabric where I want it to be is going to be at the 1/2 inch mark. So right there. So if I continue this line all the way down, this is how wide the strip of gray fabric is going to be. And there are more specific ways to do this. There are better ways to make sure that the fabric is equal in length the entire time. But because this is just a prototype, I don't really care. There's no point in trying to make it perfect if it's just not gonna be what I like for the finished product. I'm gonna clean up this area a little bit so it looks a little nicer. There we go. We have a little more focus. So if you were to imagine this cut out, you would have this strip, you would open it so that it comes to a point at the nose right here. And so if you notice, it's not like we're actually coming to a singular point at the very top. It's going to come to a point in the first 1/2 inch of the mask up here. So if you imagine this going on the mask, there's going to be a 1/2 inch space right on the edge right here. And that's where the stripe is going to go. So this makes sense right here. It makes sense that it would reach a point about 1 inch from the top. Sorry, 1/2 inch from the top. So now we have to worry about seam allowance, because what I plan on doing with this strip is putting the applique glue right here, but also flipping in the seam allowances on both sides of the fabric. And so that's what made this difficult. So if I hold this up to the camera, you can see that, actually maybe you can't see, but I'll describe it to you. So the stitching here is very, very uneven. There is a lot of varying space between the stitch line and the line where it actually folds over. The reason why I fold over the edges is because if I didn't, you would get something like this. You would get something called a frayed edge. So the way the fabric is constructed, there are long threads that go like this, and there are long threads that go like this. And when you start pulling apart one of the threads that run horizontally or one of the threads that run vertically, it starts unraveling the fabric. So if you look, some of it is a little see-through here because all the vertical threads were pulled out right here, and what's left are the little horizontal threads that are still attached to the fabric this way, but they're showing on this edge. And so you never want frayed edges on anything, because let's say I had a seam, let's say I stitched with my machine right along the edge here. The more this frays, the more likely the seam is going to pull apart. And let's see if I can. So just to show you the integrity of a seam, I can pull really, really hard on this. Pull, and it doesn't come undone because there's enough seam allowance. There's enough fabric on the short side. So I guess if you were to look at this, there's like the bulk of the fabric, and then the short end where the seam allowance is. So there's enough fabric on the short end to maintain the integrity of the seam. And let's say I were to keep this unfinished, in which I actually did keep it unfinished. It doesn't matter that this edge is unfinished because this is the inside of the mask and it will not see the light of day. So that is the only time when a seam, when the frayed edge of a fabric can continue to exist, if it's inside of something, where it isn't constantly rubbing against something else, or you aren't picking at the little frayed edges, and it's going to make the seam come undone. So I will be flipping. I will be taking this, adding a seam allowance to it, and then flipping that seam allowance in, so that the frayed edge, so that if I were to cut it right here, the frayed edge doesn't come out. So if you look here, you can see that there's a little fold of fabric, and that's because I folded the edges in, and nothing is loose, nothing is gonna come undone because the edge is inside of the fabric. So I'm gonna do a seam allowance. My seam allowance for this is gonna be pretty big, because I'm putting this black strip at the very top of the mask, right here. When I actually assemble the mask together, the seam allowance for this is about 1/2 inch, so it is really big right here. And I do that just so that there is enough room when I'm sewing that I don't accidentally get too close to the edge of the fabric. I can use a color pencil. Since this is an example, normally I won't use color pencils, or at least a bright color pencil, on something that I plan on selling, but because this is just an example, I will go ahead and use a darker color on the white. So this red right here, this would be the seam allowance on this mask. So, oh, I should draw it on this side too. That's a nice thing. Color pencil technically also comes out, but the color, let's say if you use red on white, this would show through the fabric, which is why I don't use it typically. So here we have our seam allowance. So instead of just lining this up right along the edge of the stripe that we want to use, I'm gonna have to align it so that this edge is on top of our edge of the stripe, like that. And then I'm gonna go ahead and trace a line. I actually don't have enough room here at the top, and that is okay because it's just the seam allowance. If it was actually the fabric that we're working with, that would be more of an issue. But if you look here, the edge of the stripe is significantly below the edge where the fabric cuts off. So we'll just not worry about that. I don't need to worry about having as big of a seam allowance here at the top. It just needs to be enough that when the stripe folds over the mask, it's not gonna pull tight because there's not enough space in the middle here. So my seam allowance is probably about 1/4 inch right here. And that's gonna go up. The seam allowance is gonna be really, really big, because then when I put it on here, I'm gonna line it so it goes with the seam allowance. It follows the seam allowance here, and then I'm gonna fold the entire thing over, and then it'll be nicely along the edge of the fold. I'm going to do the same. I'm gonna add a seam allowance to the bottom, but I'm not gonna make it that big, just to conserve fabric. The reason why this top edge needs to have a really big seam allowance is because it's gonna fold over the mask with the mask when I assemble it. But this bottom seam edge is going to be on the front of the mask, right here. And so it doesn't need that big of a seam allowance. So I just eyeball it. I typically give like 1/4 inch. I find that's a good enough seam allowance. So I just draw that all the way across. And then, do I need a seam allowance for the edge? Yes, I do. So I'm gonna flip this upside down. When you assemble, or when I assemble the mask at the end, what this is gonna look like, I have the 2 free edges here. You always wanna, there's a rule, right sides together. Right side, meaning the side of the fabric that you are going to show to the outside, like let's say the inner part of a skirt, the outer part of a skirt. The It's a little hard to see on white fabric, but this is where I'm going to be putting the stripes. So I want to make sure that's facing outward. But when you're flipping something inside out, those pieces actually need to be together on the inside. So I align the two pieces of fabric so that they match. And if you look, you can see that I have a seam allowance already traced for the top. I'm gonna have the same seam allowance for the bottom. I'm gonna have the same seam allowances for the side. So that when I flip this inside out, ta-da, that's what's gonna look like, except these frayed edges are going to be folded in like this. And you're gonna have a nice folded edge. So because I'm going to have a seam allowance on the side, I'm going to go ahead and draw that in. Right here. That's also going to be a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So I've done it enough times where I can sort of eyeball it and know that this is a 1/2 inch seam allowance right here. So why is it that I'm stopping the seam allowance right along this bottom edge here and I'm increasing the seam allowance to the top? It's because there's a corner. I need to make sure that there's enough space on either side of here so that it matches along the same lines. Alrighty. So now we're gonna cut this out and see if it works. I have my trusty little toolkit. I have everything that I need immediately in here. Again, the person who made these beautiful Lazulight stickers is Remmuru. Go ahead and check them out on Twitter and buy their stickers. I bought these a long time ago and they've been on this box ever since. I love them dearly. So these green scissors, these are my general fabric cutting scissors. These are really good for cutting just like strips of fabric going down the way. A lot of the work that I do though, especially because it's on a much smaller scale, rather than making pants, rather than making t-shirts, dresses, stuff like that, I have a smaller set of scissors that are these orange ones. So these are just general use, multi-purpose small scissors. If I ever have extra, oops, this fell out. But if I ever have extra string, I literally just hold up the string, snip it with these scissors. This is actually a more specialized pair of snipping scissors for thread that I prefer to use rather than these. And I'll just explain it because I like these scissors a lot. The difference between using these scissors where you push on the side and these scissors where you stick your fingers through it is exactly that. You have to stick your fingers through these scissors, and sometimes you just have these on your table, you just want to grab it and snip. Just using the top two pointer fingers, you can cut anything. But this, if I have it on my table, I have to loop my fingers through it and then cut. And especially if you're doing things very quickly and you need to just cut something really fast, it's just easier to pick up a pair that you don't have to slip your fingers into anything and then just start cutting. This is your sewing best friend. This is called a seam ripper. And you would think, why is it that your best friend is something used to remove your hard work? That's because you will mess up a lot. That is why it is your best friend. It is the best tool for taking out seams when you accidentally sewed in the wrong direction. You accidentally sewed two pieces of fabric together, a right side and a wrong side. So this is the wrong side of the fabric with the seam. This is the right side of the fabric. If I put those two together, one of the wrong sides is going to show, one of the right sides on this side is going to show. And that is your worst nightmare, because then every time that you sew and you have to take out the seam, it takes away from the integrity of the fabric, because the fabric already has holes in it from sewing. Now that you're taking out the thread and exposing the fabric, you have holes there. When you sew on top of it, there's going to be less fabric for the thread to hold on to. These are just general threads. I prefer using Gutermann. Gutermann is a polyester thread. I could go into later the differences between like cotton thread and polyester thread, but essentially polyester thread doesn't have as many little hairs and it doesn't mess up your machine as much. So this is cotton thread. As it goes through the machine, it might give off some hairs and it is just more to clean later on. This is a trusty measuring tape. As you can hear it click, it has an automatic click function, and then you press the button, and it goes, and it just slurps the tape back into the thing, which I really like. You can snap it back into place whenever you want. This is also flexible, so let's say I have a curve, like my mask here, and I can't use a standard ruler to measure a curve. I use this. I place it on one edge of the fabric, I wrap it around the other edge, and it'll give me a more accurate read of how much fabric it's going to take on either side. So if we actually want to go ahead and measure it and then compare to see if I got the sizes, the length right. So if I start from the edge of this fabric here, I measure to the center. So from the edge to the center is about 4.5 inches. I'm going to pinch it here, measure the other side. It finishes at about 9, so it's about equal. It's 4.5 inches on either side. If I measure this right here, I want to make sure that it's going to be the same length from the edge to the center, like it was there. So I start at 0, I curve upward. It's a little bigger, it's around 5 inches, but that is okay because we want more space for the top. But it's about accurate, which is a good thing. Safety pins. Safety pins are just nice in general. I just keep them in here. This is fabric glue. I mainly use this when I'm working on Pomu headbands. I don't use this for my masks, so I'm just gonna leave that in there. And then this little tomato. Push pins could be, or push cushions could be any shape, any size, but the tomato I think is a classic design. And what they did here is they just attach a strap to it, so if I wanted to, I could wrap this around my wrist and then just have my pins here, so I don't have to set it down on the table. I can move around wherever I want, take a pin, put it in my fabric, or stab it back. I don't want to stab myself, that's why I do this. So even though it does have a little cute strap on it, I just set it down on the table. And as you can see, I have a bunch of different colorful pins. Will you focus? Colorful pins. I have some smaller pins here. They have different functionality differences, but that's irrelevant for this here. So that's my toolkit. I have everything that I need in one place, and I take it with me, or have it with me all the time, so you will be seeing it more often. So what I'm gonna need are these scissors. These are my thread cutting scissors, and then my general fabric scissors. Leave some of these mask pieces off to the side. I have just a bunch of stuff here. My ruler out to the side. I don't need these pens anymore because I'm not drawing for pretty away. If you try to keep track of your desk space while you're crafting, it'll just provide less headache at the end when you're trying to put everything away. So I'll leave those at the top. I have my chalk and my tracing pencils in case I need it. I also have the color pencil so you can see the lines better. Push my mouse over to the side and voila! Also don't need this pen because I'm not drawing it. And now the space is a little cleaner. How are y'all doing so far? Am I explaining things in a way that makes sense? I'm trying to explain things in a way that people who haven't sewed before could understand the concepts, but also trying to explain this more complicated process. because sometimes it's difficult to talk about the basics and then also talk about what you're going to do for more complex projects. So I hope that just as we continue on, it'll just make more sense. Thank you, Sam, for the affirmation. So now we're just gonna cut it. Snip, snip. Here we go. I'm cutting along the bottom edge. This is the bottom seam allowance. That's about 1/4 inch. Cool. And then I'm gonna be cutting, actually, I'm gonna make this even. It's a little uneven at the top, so I'm gonna cut out all the extra fabric right there. And then I'm going to cut off oh no. I realized that if I cut off the tip right here of the little bit of seam allowance, it's gonna become 2 separate pieces. And that's not what I want. What I might have to do, what did I do here? What I might have to do is just sew it together. And maybe that'll make it, if I, especially since I added a little seam allowance here, it would make it so that it fit perfectly on top. What to do? It's hard because this is curved. I'm just gonna cut it. Nip. Can deal with it later. Keep moving. And now I'm cutting along the top edge of the fabric, which is a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So now we have these extra pieces of fabric. They're just gonna go to trash. You actually realize as you're sewing that there's just a lot of waste involved in making things. And it's unfortunately just because stuff just doesn't all geometrically fit on one piece of fabric, so you just gotta take the L. So now, when I open this up, I think it is, yes, it is connected by a small piece right there. But now when I open it up, ta-da, that's what it looks like. And already looking at this, little warning bells are going off in my brain. That is because this should be folded like that. But when I go ahead and sew it, I will use the small amount of seam allowance, sew that together, and then it should come out to this, which is what I want. So now if we take this and place it right on top of a mask, right here, it should have the same curve. And if it does, then that means we did our job correctly. Ta-da! It takes a little bit of finagling, but as long as the edge of the black piece of fabric is along the same edge as the white piece of fabric, we did it right. So, finish this one. I think this design might work, so I'm actually going to create a template out of paper right now, just so that when I do it again, I don't have to redo the measurements or everything. I can just keep it. So, yes, so this will be difficult. I might just have to trace everything out on a piece of paper. Hold on. Just... Alright. Trace that edge up here. Oh! Oops. I don't think that's gonna work out. Flip this over. I forget. By tracing the top edge here, this is the seam allowance. So I want to try to go as far up as possible because the seam allowance is the top edge of the fabric. Mark where the seam allowance is here, trace that all the way around. So this is the seam allowance, and then you have the actual stripe here, and I want it to be, did I say I wanted a half it half an inch? Half an inch, yeah. I'm gonna mark that. Half an inch right here. This will be my actual stripe as it is going on the mask. Whoop. All right, so I should have moved this over a little more so I can incorporate the seam allowance, but that's okay. And then a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Alrighty, so that is my template. And I'm going to use regular scissors because if you use fabric scissors on paper, it dulls it. The same thing. Oh, oops. I also need a seam allowance on the side here. So if this is the center, I only need about a 1/4 inch seam allowance here. And then on the edge here, I need a solid half an inch over there. So I actually messed up the positioning of this. It's getting cut off, but that is okay. Seam allowance is always really easy. You can always just guesstimate that. But as long as I have the shape of what I want in here, that's what's most important. So using regular scissors to cut this out. I have a little bit of seam allowance here. I'm cutting on the top edge of the seam allowance here. My seam allowance could actually be a little bit bigger. And then, yeah, this is my edge of the seam allowance, so I don't need to cut any of this. If I'm drawing this on a piece of fabric, I need to make sure that this edge extends all the way here. So then this space is included. Nice, now I have a template that if I want to replicate this again, I can try it. I normally call them my prototypes. Ria, does it matter if the material is stretchable or no? That is a really good question. So this cotton fabric, 100% cotton fabric, is not stretchy, and stretchiness definitely affects the composition of whatever you're making. So the reason why my masks are made out of a non-stretchy material is because when they're on your face, I don't want them to warp or lose their elasticity over time and then start sagging. The cotton fabric will keep its shape as long as you keep the seams pretty tight. And so let's say if I were to use an elastic fabric like gloves, do I have it? Yeah. I do. So let's say I made the mask out of this fabric. Do you see how it's sheer? You can see through it. One, it provides less protection for the mask, but two, it'll lose, especially if it's stretching over your face, it'll lose its elasticity over time. And that's not what we want. We don't want a saggy piece of fabric on your face. That's a really good question, Maria. Thank you for asking. In general though, knit fabrics are really great if you need something a little more stretchy. If you like wear athletic joggers, those are made out of stretchy material. This is actually, this might be a blend or it might be 100% cotton, but this isn't very stretchy. Excuse me. Yeah, I think just using cotton in general is a pretty safe bet. There's a lot of other types of cotton weaves, so like lawn is very sheer. This is made out of polyester, so polyester is plastic, which is why it has this stretchy ability. Cotton is just made out of fibers that don't stretch. Yeah, there's a lot of benefits for either, but for all intents and purposes now, we use cotton fabric. Okay, so I'm gonna call this template 1.0. I feel like it's very, I don't know, very engineer-like, I guess. My background is not in engineering, but when I think about constructing stuff like this, I'm like, oh yes, that's what engineering must feel like. That's what it must feel like to be an engineer. I don't know. If y'all are engineers in the chat, you can let me know whether or not that's accurate. I could only look at engineers from afar and be like, damn, they're doing some good work. And then just not touch that with a 10-foot pole myself, especially because they do a lot of math. Alrighty, so I will go through with the sewing machine, sew this on top. But before I do that, I want to prep all my materials before I go to the sewing machine, so we're just gonna leave that there. Now we're gonna work on the orange stripe right here. So let's go ahead and throw this away, push this off to this side, push this off to the side. Maybe I'll put this over here with my other fabrics. Keep this as a reference because we're gonna need it. Put this black fabric away because we're not gonna need that. And then bring out the orange one. So the orange one is gonna be composed a little differently. Couldn't be me either, Rhea. Couldn't be me either. So interesting factoid, this is called an eighth cut. It is an eighth of a yard. A yard is 3 feet. So when you buy a yard of fabric, typically for cotton fabric, it is $7.99. But because I bought an eighth of it, this is about $1 something. And that's why I really like making masks, because it feels like I can buy a bunch of different colors for cheaper. And then I don't have to worry as much that if I mess up, I'm losing like really expensive fabric. Like if you like maybe like satin type fabrics, it's like $18.99 a yard. So if you mess up while working on a project, you gotta toss that shit out and start over again and buy some more. And so that's why also cotton's a pretty safe bet. So now we have our cotton that's flat like this, the eighth cut. We're gonna turn it into let's make it a 16th cut. How does math work? Yeah, if you cut it in half, because if you were to fold every eighth piece in half, it would then turn it into a 1/16. So this will be a 1/16. I sort of know my math. Anyways, so the difference between this top stripe and the bottom stripe is that this bottom stripe is not going to hang over the edge of the fabric like this one is. The two seam allowances, we're gonna see something very similar to this, but the two seam allowances are just going to be folded into each other so that it's just the fabric on top, if you get what I mean. So when I position this, let me go ahead and read this comment. Does that mean the machine you bought that like cuts larger pieces also works on fabric? Like, could you just throw the thing in and it'll cut it? So yes, to answer your question, yes, the machine does cut fabric. The difficult thing about cutting these pieces on that machine is that I don't know how well it cuts fabric that's folded in half. So especially if I'm doing a project like this where you need 2 different pieces, I don't know if it's gonna cut through both pieces of fabric evenly, because what might also happen, it'll cut through the top, but when it's sliding the blade through the fabric, it might start warping and shifting so that the 2 pieces don't end up cutting evenly. I thought about using the cutting machine to cut fabric, but then I realized it has to be one on one plane. And let me bring out my tarp right now, actually. So this is a 12 by 12 square. This is the mat that you use that you put through your cutting machine. So let's say I have a piece of fabric that's this big. Each individual headband is about like this big. So it takes up about this quadrant space, this upper hemisphere space here. So I would be able to make 2 headbands like this, 1 and 2. However, it'll only be one-sided. So then I'd end up eventually just having to grab this, putting it on top, and then sewing it around the edges. And honestly, it's just a lot faster. If I have my folded fabric here, I trace out one side of the fabric and then just cut it. And then it's already 2-sided. Oh, so if you like stack paper on each other and try to cut it with scissors then. Yeah. So if you have, it's easier to cut out paper when it's 2-sided, but when you start getting a little more complex with more layers in it, it starts, the edges aren't sharp. It starts becoming almost like an accordion, where you start seeing the layers sort of fold outward like this, especially if you're cutting curves. And so that's the difficult part. Like, that machine is really, really good for cutting craft foam, because craft foam is already thick. You don't need multiple layers of craft foam. It just cuts it, and then it's perfect. But anything like fabric, that requires a little more thinking and trial and error. So like, what I maybe could do is just cut out a bunch of these little fish pieces. The unfortunate thing about that is that if I cut out the fabric, I also have to cut out the glue. So then I would need like 2 different sheets, one of just the fish fabric, one of just the fish glue, and then I would have to iron them on together. But that's another headache. So yeah, that's a really good question though. It's a lot of thinking when you're putting this stuff together. It's a lot of experiencing. Yeah, it's better for the accessories. So like Aya's hair accessories, let me grab them. I'll be right back. Went to my little cosplay drawer. Hold on, what I needed. Okay. So we have 2 different types. Sorry, we're getting a little off tangent here, but also this is just really cool, so I want to explain it. So here we have the first Aya piece. It's very, you can tell it's very flat, but it still has volume. It has enough weight to it so that when I shake it, it doesn't like wow, 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 because it's too flexible. Same thing with this piece right here, this little cross piece. It actually looks like it has a little bit dimension of it. It has a little dimension to it because I actually put 2 pieces of cardstock on either side of the foam just to give it a more solid feeling, so I could toss it between my hands, not really have to worrying about I was about to say hurting it, damaging it. It is not a live thing. But when you look at sorry, this one's a little beat up because this is my own personal one, not the ones that I'm selling. But if you look at my little wing accessory, this is also made out of craft foam. I did not put a second layer of cardstock on the back because having this little arrow piece attached to the back wing actually gives it a lot of stability. So I can hold it from this angle and not worry about like trashing it because it's just a layer of cardstock and craft foam. So as long as I'm not just holding it by here and like bending it, trying to rip it off, then nothing's gonna happen to this. So yeah, so that cutting machine, so this cutting was done by hand. It's a little more simpler shape. There's a more rounded, yeah, right? The cross came out really well. So again, Frag was the one who designed this. He drew this on a program, sent it to me. I put it through the computer on the cutting machine, and then I was able to cut it out like this. So thank you again, especially for doing it last minute. the day before I decided to make it, I'm just like, could you make this for me? I was even thinking about it beforehand, but it didn't even come to mind to ask earlier, and that was my fault. So bringing it back to project manager on my slide, it's about being responsible when asking other people for help, giving them enough time to actually like do the thing that you need. But if you look at this shape in particular, doing these little holes on the inside of a flat plane is very difficult. Like, that is not something you can do with scissors. Like, you can't get your scissors in there and try to cut like a nice clean cut. You might still be able to do like a scalpel, but that just requires a lot of physical labor. And so the beauty of this machine is that it literally moves this on the 2D plane wherever it needs to, and then it has the little needle, so it just goes and it just cuts out everything as you need to. And so yeah, it's really gorgeous. Like when I look at this, like you might think like, oh my god, like what is it made out of? Like it's just craft foam and cardstock. Like sometimes the prettiest things you can make are more simple, which is why I still like using craft foam for using for like little pomo hair accessories, because then when you put them on, they're also really lightweight. Yeah, enough of that tangent. I'm gonna put this away. I'll be right back. Alrighty. So now it's going to be the orange fabric. I forgot where we left off. I think I was just explaining that it's going to be a little lower. The stripe is going to be a little lower on the mask, and then the seam allowance is the same. So it's not a quarter. It's not a half an inch and a quarter of an inch. It's just going to be a quarter of an inch on either side. It's also going to be a little bit longer than the top. So if you look at the mask here, I'm keeping a track on time, so I want to stop this stream in about so like 2 hours total, so about 40 minutes from now. Wherever we get, I'll just stop it there, and then I'll either post progress pictures on Twitter or we'll just continue this another day. It just depends on how much I think I can accomplish. So if you look at the distance from here to here versus from here to here, this covers more distance. Let's actually measure it with a measuring tape to see what the difference in length is. So we already established that it's about 4.5 inches. 4.5, a little more than 5 because you have the seam allowance from here to here, but then from the bottom here to the center, it's more like 5.5. So you get an additional half an inch distance, because if you actually measure this from the tip of the mask here out this way, it's about an inch. And so obviously because it's rounded, the measurements aren't going to be exact, but it's the same concept. So when I am drawing this, it might actually be easier because it'll be hard to fold this to try to figure out what the shape is going to be like. So sometimes what I like to do is just grab a piece of this is just extra cardstock, and then just try to fashion it out of paper first, just eyeballing it on here. So if the first stripe from the edge of the fabric is gonna come about half an inch, then it's gonna end. So let's go ahead and draw. So this is gonna be half an inch here, half an inch here, like that. Go ahead and draw. I'll make this a really, really solid red line. So this right here, between here and here, this is our first black stripe. And so I want to leave a little bit of space in between the black stripe and the white stripe just to give that seifuku look, where you have on the cuff of a sleeve, for example, you can have the stripe here and you can have the stripe here. How much space? That is the question. I think I might keep it pretty continuous. So if this is about half an inch of space, I might do a quarter inch of space here, just so that the ratios stay the same. Maybe I'll just color. I'll color this one. Okay. Leaving about a quarter of an inch space here. And then I'm gonna go ahead, maybe I'll choose a different color. I guess we'll just choose orange. It's also gonna be another half an inch. Here. Oh, this is like a... It's not like a bright orange, it's like a bloody orange. Like a not bloody orange, blood orange. I guess blood orange and then pink. Anyways. There we go. That's what our mask is gonna look like. Honestly, that looks really good to me. I really like the way this looks. I might actually... What's the saying? Plan for more than you need in case you need it or something like that. Yeah, exactly. Like, especially with this, if you can try to make things as flexible as possible, then you can plan for like the stuff that's unexpected. So like, let's say this space ends up being looking really, really tiny. If I make this a little bit longer, then I can shift this downward and leave more space in the middle. So this is actually not the side that the fish is gonna go, but this is essentially what it would look like. And I think that balance is really good. So you have the two stripes on top, you have a bunch of white space, and then you have this little fish just swimming in that white space, and I think that looks really good. Alrighty, so if that's what my stripe looks like, this is how I'm gonna finagle it. I'm going to try to mimic this line, cut the cardstock to match it, and then cut the bottom edge. It's a little janky, but I'll find it'll work. So I'm gonna take the edge here, like here. Clover, hello, welcome! Petra time! And we're gonna do that here. And then... where is this point? That's a difficult part. Where am I gonna find this point on the bottom? So I'm gonna try to rotate this. How much distance is that? Maybe that will work. Alright, so let's just leave this here, and I'm gonna pretend there's a curve here. We're gonna draw that line. And we're gonna cut it. We're just gonna see. We're just gonna see how that works. Whee! So this does not include seam allowance, and I'll show you. There's another technique to using templates. Hey yo! Yeah. Sometimes you just gotta try it. Sometimes it just doesn't work out, and in this case it did, so I'm really happy that it did. But this is about the approximate curve. It's not as steep. There's a little bit of space in between the line and like where the actual cardstock is here. But that's okay. Now that I actually have the curve of the cardstock, I'm gonna have it end all the way up here. I have a better idea. Let's say I'm gonna trace this line, just approximate where the fabric is going, and that is approximately correct. I'm gonna go ahead and guesstimate how much space is going to be needed for the second stripe. So then it's about 1/4 inch, so I'll go ahead and use a ruler. Sorry, 1/2 inch here, 1/2 inch there. I'm gonna follow that line. So what you can also do is just mark 1/2 inch all the way across the edge here. That way you can keep your markings really consistent, and then just follow the lines like that. There we go. So now we're getting the second stripe, the orange stripe here. And I did mention before that it would be a good idea to extend this just in case we want to move this down and we need more space. So because I ran out of space here on this side, I could actually just shift this forward a little bit and increase the amount of space in the back here. There we go. We'll do about, it's a little more than 1/4 inch space, but I think that'll be enough. And now I will cut this using regular scissors again, because if you use fabric scissors on not fabric, then it dulls them. It's the same thing. If you use regular scissors on fabric, it also dulls them. So, ta-da! Alrighty, so we actually have about 1/4 inch more space than we need, just in case we need to bring it down a little bit. If I do bring it down, then it's exactly the same length here as the seam allowance. So yeah, so you might be wondering, why is it that I didn't put seam allowance on this strip and I did on this template? So there's two different ways that you can use templates. This one is my preference, and I'll explain why. Let me put this away. Okay, so when you have a piece of fabric and you know the shape in the middle is what you want, and you trace this and cut it out just like this, you have the seam allowance incorporated. And so some people know that 100% they use a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So they will put this into the sewing machine. There's little measurements on the bottom of the sewing machine that tells you how far is it from the needle. So they'll bring it to the 1/2 inch point, and then they'll just follow this line of the fabric and sew. They'll put this through the machine, tuck, 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 like that. And then by using this edge, then they know, you know what, I am sewing directly on top of the line that I want. Right here. But because I don't trust myself, to follow the seam allowances equally, I then take out the variability of that. So instead, I use this shape that is exactly what I want, and then I add a variable seam allowance to it. So that's what we're gonna do right now. So I'm gonna take my fabric. I'm gonna make sure that the folded edge here, I need to mark this. So this is the nose, and then this is the ear. That way the orientation will never get messed up. If I flip this around or somehow like move it upside down, I know the orientation is nose and ear, because this is imagining like if you have the side of a face right here, this is the right side of the face. So this might actually be too long. So it is too long. Because if I wanted to have this, the fold right here, it would have to be oriented this way, and obviously there's not enough space. So what you can do is just fold your base fabric a different way. So instead of hot dog style, hamburger style. So now I have a lot more space to work with. Again, I'm not gonna line this directly on the fold, because then it's not gonna have a nice finish. So if you look here, this has a little V, right? And when I sew it together and then I flip it around, it has this really nice continuous shape to it that you can't necessarily get if you just use the fold line. If you just use the fold line, it's like putting something really flat on the bridge of your nose. It just like, it doesn't conform to the shape, right? So if you actually have a seam at this centerpiece, then you get a little more shape to it. So I did it here, which is really good, but because I put the applique in it, it destroyed it. There's no nose bridge here. So if you were to wear this, it would push down on your nose because there's no space for a nose bridge. And that's what I want to avoid. So when I'm setting this up, I'm gonna rotate this. When I set this up, I'm actually gonna go at it from an angle. That way I have a little bit of seam allowance here. And I don't think I need to add a lot more seam allowance because I accounted for some in the back here. So when I cut this, I'm gonna cut it straight to the tip up here, and then be done with it. Actually, maybe because I'm gonna have to cut it anyways. Oh, but I didn't want to cut it the whole way, so I want there to be a little thing and just go. All right, Rhea, I have a question. What about ironing a crease? So that's actually what I'm gonna do for the seam allowance. That will come later. So first we have to cut it out and then add the seam allowance to it. So I'm decreasing the amount of area just so I can use as much fabric as possible. And then you see this is about a little more than 1/2 inch. That's good enough. Sometimes I really like to get it really, really close. But if I ever mess up, I want to make sure I have more fabric than not, so I'm going to increase the area a little bit. Rhea actually brought up a good point. So ironing. Ironing is really important when you have fabric. Cotton fabric, it tends to make creases, but unless you're like bundling up like this, it'll be pretty straight. Because whenever they have it on what's called the bolts, it's just the roll of fabric that this fabric comes from. It's primed with a type of chemical that keeps it really crisp. So if you could tell, like even just bunching up that little bit, it started getting some creases. But if you fold it and you keep it in good condition, then the only folds you're going to see are going to be the folds in which you fold it. So in this case, I don't really have to worry about any like creases here. If you really want to, you can iron it, but I just find that's just a waste of time. I'm going to end up ironing this all later, so it doesn't really matter. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to place this close to the top, but not too close to the top because last time I ran out of room at the top. And then I'm going to measure out, actually, first things first, I'm going to draw right along the edge of this template, because this will tell me this is exactly the shape that I want. That's going to go on the mask. And we'll keep the extra seam allowance here, just so that I know that this could be cut off if I don't need that space, or this could be shifted if I need that space. Right. So now that I have my solid shape, I'm now going to add the seam allowance. So I normally just use 1/4 of an inch. So it would be about here. Go ahead and draw another line. I'm still gonna put the seam allowance along the extra bit here in case we end up using it. This part is going to be on the mask. This part is going to be the seam allowance. So I'm still going to make it a little bigger. I'm glad that I extended it a little bit, because if I didn't, then I wouldn't have that space. Alrighty. And then at the top here, I'm going to extend it out and then have the same amount of seam allowance in the middle, so that when I cut this, so I realize I know how I want to cut it. So if you look at the corner right here, it reaches the end of this fabric. So this part's going to stay together. I'm going to cut it up here so that there's still a point of attachment, but it will make it easier for me when I sew it all together. So this is one thing I didn't do when I cut out the other piece. Pinning it. So pinning it makes sure that the fabric doesn't slide as you're cutting it. Because I'm dealing with something so small, it doesn't really matter if I pin it or not. It's just like cutting 2 pieces of paper. You're not really going to get that much of a difference between the two, because the scissor can like sort of handle them both at the same time. But once you start getting like 4 layers, or like 4 layers of paper, 4 layers of fabric, you really need to pin to make sure that the pieces don't shift as they're being cut. And don't want to use regular scissors. Those away. I have my fabric scissors instead. Cutting from the top. I am cutting from the top seam allowance. Cutting from the bottom seam allowance. Nice and clean. And now I have this extra space. You can see the cutout of exactly what I cut out. What I like to do is, just to reduce bulk, I'm just gonna cut it right off, because there's not too many items unless you're doing like small, like Nendroid clothes, doll clothes. There's no use for this fabric, so literally just cut it off. There you go. Just going in the trash. Again, every time I see like a wasted fabric, I was like, I could use it for something. But even doll clothes, like, it requires a bigger area, and this might not even be useful, so I just throw it away. So now I can put away this fabric. And again, if I fold it up nicely, then it decreases the amount of creases that I have, and so I'm gonna follow the way that it was folded originally. So fold it half. Fold it like that. Alrighty. I'm gonna take the pins out. Careful that when you're dealing with pins, you are inevitably gonna poke yourself. There's no way to not poke yourself. It's just a day in the life, essentially. So I'm actually noticing this right here. My grandma was like that she kept fabric from like 40 years ago. Yeah, so I'm gonna show you these two spools of thread. So I told you guys that I like Gutermann thread because it's really high quality thread. It is also very expensive. So it's like $7 for a spool of 1,000 yards. So 1,000 yards will last you depending on how often you like how often you sew or what you're using it for, but 1,000 yards will last me a good like couple of months. But my grandma just has like 3 drawers full of different colored spools. So this would be considered embroidery thread. Sorry, not embroidery thread. It would be considered what is it called? I can't remember the word. There's a certain type of sewing. Does it snap less? That's a good question. Depending on the quality of this thread, it might... These threads are probably more likely to snap than the pure 100% polyester thread that I have. Because my grandma just collected these, there's no labels on them or anything. Like sometimes I see listings on like Facebook or whatever for just someone's collection of just spools of thread that they've collected. Like, yeah, we're getting rid of it for like $6 a piece or something like that. And like, in my eyes, I'm like, oh, thread? Oh, I want more thread. But then I'm also like, but if it's not good quality thread, then is it worth getting it? And I just realized that like buying Gutermann thread is great and all, but it's, if I have access to this thread, I'm gonna use that instead. And the reason why this is just there's considerably less thread on here is because, yeah, this is more pricey. This is a serging thread. That's the word. So there's a machine called a serger. If you actually look at any piece of garment that you wear, it's probably factory made. And so if you look here, the edges of this fabric were finished by a serger. And so I'll go into that later on, the difference between finishing it yourself and using a serger. But a serger, it uses a lot of thread to make sure that you're not going to have any unfinished edges on here. So if you look at the design of the serger, so the one on here, it goes like dish, dick, 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 dick on the base, but in between each single stitch, it goes up twice, single stitch, up twice, single stitch, up twice, single stitch. And that is considerably more thread than just having a single stitch all the way across. So that's why these serger threads tend to have just so much more, but they also are lesser quality. Because if you had this much thread of really nice, like the 100% polyester thread, that could be really forking expensive. And so typically these are of lesser quality. You can buy serging thread of like the 100% polyester one, but that's gonna be really expensive. So yeah, I took these from my grandma. She literally has drawers full, and she was just like, you don't even have to tell me you're gonna take it, just take it. And I'm like, okay. So when I was working on my Pulmu robe cosplay, she happened to have green thread that was exactly the same color as a towel that I was using. I'm like, I'll take that. And then now I have to give it back to her, and it's just like, it's that back and forth process. A part of me wishes I could just keep it here, just have the whole drawer here, but obviously it's still hers, so. Anyways, so white and black, these are the two colors that you're gonna be using the most. It doesn't matter if you are, let's say I'm sewing the bottom here. Oh wait, it does matter because it does show. Forget what I was saying. So I'm gonna put this away. I've been using these as like my little paintbrush holders out on the side of the box. Alright, so we have about 20 minutes left. I guess we're not touching the sewing machine today, which is perfectly okay. The preparation time takes a lot longer than actually sewing it. And sometimes that could be the frustrating thing about working on a project. You don't really get to see all your work come together until the very end, and sometimes it could just be very like, you just be really impatient, being like, I really want to see how this is gonna look because I don't want to continue doing this anymore. And you just gotta suck it up. If you want to see it come to life, you just gotta put the work into it. So and can you imagine, like, we didn't even put anything on the mask. We didn't even sew the base of the mask on together. All we did was just design 2 little strips of fabric. And this is the most difficult part of the process. Once I figure this out with you guys, then I'll be able to replicate this a lot faster, such as just using these templates to trace it, cut it, trace it, cut it, so that I can mass produce it. So yeah, it do sneak up on you in boom bay time. You so right. Oh, you guys should check out Friars. They've made a pomudachi and an shoot, I don't know what Aster's I don't know what Aster's following is called, but they also made an Aster plushie, which Aster like mascot plushie, which is really cute. So check out their stuff as well. So now that we did these 2, alright, so I think we'll just spend the rest of the time talking about the complicated dilemma that we've run across. Arcadian! Thank you, an Arcadian. Oh, because he's Arcadia. Okay, I understand. An Arcadian. Alright, so this is also something that I've been dreading. So if we look at this mess, I put the I almost said embroidery. I'm starting to lose it. The applique glue, I put it entirely throughout this, which is why it's completely flat. On this one, I did not use any applique glue, which is why it started bunching. And so I know for sure that I want to put applique glue in this area. But the question is, do I put it on top of the seam allowance or just in the stripe? And that makes things a little more complicated, because if it's just in the stripe, the orange one is going to be easy because I already have a shape here that's just the stripe. It's exactly what I need, seam allowance not included. But if I'm going to do the black one, I might have to make another template that just has this stripe in the middle, because I want to remember how much seam allowance that I put on the outside. And the reason why I have to consider this is because applique glue can get sticky and get stuck on your needle. And sometimes that'll cause the needle to snag, and then you have to rethread your needle again. It's not great. And so that's why I'm hesitant to put it along the seam allowance here, but it would also be the easiest thing to do. So if I just put applique glue along this edge and call it a day, it'll be a lot easier in terms of like actually cutting out the applique glue. But in order to prevent it from like messing up my machine, I would have to just put it within the space. And then another question that I have is that, oh, you know what? Okay, I know for sure that a single layer of applique glue can be sewed on. So I can go da 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 da, and it'll be okay. But if I put it on here and I fold this over for the seam allowance right on the edge here, and then I double up on the applique glue, will that mess up my machine? And I think there might be an answer somewhere on there. I find that sewing questions are very hard to be answered on the internet. It's more just trial and error. We could try to figure it out right now. Hey. Alright, so let me grab my applique glue. This is actually called a seam and steam. It doesn't have a name other than that, seam and steam. Which I don't know how to feel about that. That's why I just call it applique glue. Because it's weird because the process is called applique, so I can't call this applique because this is fabric and this is glue. So it's just applique. Applique glue. I have no clue. The only thing I've sewn is underwear. Yeah. Sorry, I don't remember what you were referring to. Like on a sewing machine? Or just like in general? Okay. I'm gonna fold this in half. That way I get 2 different layers. That way I don't have to repeat it twice. Well... okay, actually, I might just have to do single layer on this because I do not want to have applique glue on this edge right here where I'm sewing it. Like, I want to try to reduce... Oh, in general, got it. I want to try to reduce the amount of sewing that I do on top of applique glue as possible. And it just makes things, like, stickier and hard to work with. So I guess I am doing just 2 completely separate pieces. I can still fold it. I can still fold this in half like this and just cut it out and be fine. So in this case, this could be any orientation that I want. Because since it's going to be 2 separate pieces, I could just try to use up as much of this as possible. So I'm going to take my pencil. I normally use a pencil on this just because it's easier to draw. It's almost like tracing paper. You can just go ahead and run your pencil along it like that. Cool. And I'm gonna do 2 pieces. Just kidding, I don't need to do 2 pieces. Ooh, another dilemma. So I don't want to put pins in this because it's gonna make my pins all gunky. So when I'm cutting this out, I just have to pray that the other piece is gonna come out the same. So in this case, I'm going to use my fabric scissors. I can always wipe them off afterward. Oh, another thing is that unless you use heat, it doesn't get gunky. It's just sticky sometimes, and I'll do it as much as possible. So I'm trying to hold the 2 pieces as tight as I can, and then cut along the line. And cut. Cool. It looks like it's pretty even so far. Just cut this. Cut along here. It's okay if it's not exact. Essentially, I just need something in the center of the fabric to make sure that it just doesn't come undone in the middle of it. Alright, so I might go just a little bit above 4 o'clock just so I can finish explaining what we're going to be doing next. And then it looks like I will end up doing another stream on this. I am going to be very busy this weekend, so normally I think I would just finish it on my own this weekend. And if we just continue on another project, I could just go through the same thing with another mask design that I want. But in this particularly, we still have a lot more to do. Fusible interfacing. This is... Oh, no. Okay. Yes, it is different from fusible interfacing. So interfacing is... I have to make sure I'm not getting confused in the wrong thing. Because there's 3 different types. There's glue, there's interfacing, and there's tearaway. I think there's also tearaway interfacing. You know, I don't know. But fusible interfacing is if, let's say, you wanted to embroider something. What's something that has embroidery I have on hand? I don't know if I have anything. I can go pick out a t-shirt, but I think you guys have seen embroidered t-shirts before. Have you ever looked inside out and then seen just like a white piece of cloth just behind your embroidery? Sometimes you can tear it off, sometimes you can't. It just depends on what the manufacturer chose to do. But interfacing is supposed to provide support. So, for example, like the waist of a skirt. So if you were to have just two pieces of cotton, you could sort of shift it back and forth, sort of like you could with this right here. You sort of shift it back and forth. There's just no support on the inside. So then you use fusible or ironable interfacing on the inside of it to give it some more structure. So then when you finally like start like gripping the edge of the yep, in uniforms, and yeah, exactly. So so sometimes interfacing is used in between fabrics, sometimes interfacing is just used behind a fabric, and it could be tearaway. So specifically for a skirt, it provides structure so that it has a little bit of heft to it. In terms of the embroidery shirts, it's so that every time, because embroidery, what it is just using a machine to fill in space using thread. So that means your sewing needle is going to go da 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 really, really narrowly onto your fabric. And when it does that, that means the amount of fabric that is used in between the little thread points just gets smaller and smaller and smaller because the thread has tension and it's pulling all the fabric together. And so in order to prevent bunching so that your piece just comes out flat, oh, I have something. I have something. All right, so this patch is made by Bisocho on Twitter. I will go ahead and link them in the description since I'm showing a piece of their work. But I bought this patch from them. It is fantastic. Panchirisu, isn't that just so cute? But what they did here is that they use interfacing. So there's actually another layer back here, and it seems like this interfacing is fusible. So once I iron it on, it's gonna stick to my desired fabric. I don't need to pull it off. But essentially, they did all of this embroidery on top of this fusible interfacing, and it prevented it from coming undone. It prevented like this from just like shrinking. And yeah, so that's what fusible interfacing is for. So if it's like this, the glue essentially became like a fusible interfacing here. It gave it some structure, but that's because I just essentially glued two pieces of fabric together, just so instead of two pieces of fabric, it's three pieces of fabric, so it gives it a little bit of stiffness to it. But yeah, so that's the difference between interfacing and the glue. So the glue just adheres, the interfacing gives strength. So now what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna iron this onto here. I know, I'm so excited to put it on a jean jacket that I have. All right. So we could just continue the next time we're here. I might actually do this off screen. Because I wouldn't be able to iron on this table anyways. Having a hot iron on your desk in close proximity to you is not a good idea. It is definitely a safety hazard. Also, having it plugged into the same outlet as my computer, also a safety hazard. So when I iron, it's gonna be over there, away from my desk, and I will just mute my mic. You won't be able to hear me for a little bit until I finish ironing. So the next piece of this work right here, actually, so I opened it up, and if I were to mirror this over here, which would actually just be stuck right here, and I have to figure out what to do with this inside. Because if I cut it out in like a V shape, if I cut it out in a V shape, will it be like this? Yes, yes it would. and that is what we want, plus seam allowance in there. Because this also has seam allowance in there, but the seam allowance is a lot smaller. Should I shrink it? Think about that. Excuse me. Sorry, I did not mean for that to go perfect. So that would like go this way. Yeah, I think cutting this off would be really good. And then where I would sew it. Do I want to keep the seam allowance? No. Okay, I figured it out. Cut this off. Bye-bye. Snip. Hey, sorry. And then this seam allowance is essentially for just when I sew these two pieces together, right here, it's just so that the seam doesn't come out. Maybe next time, hold on, actually, can you guys tell me if it's hard to see everything because it's like such a big angle? Maybe next time I'll just really like get in close in here, so that way it's just easier for you guys to see what's going on. I thought a wider space would be better, but considering I don't have my sewing machine out, it makes more sense to like just zoom in on the table. Yeah, I'll start messing with different angles and stuff. But yes, this seam allowance right here is not the seam allowance for attaching it onto the mask. It's a seam allowance specifically, so I can just go like this. Ta-da! Okay, so the only thing that's kind of hard to see, but otherwise, okay, that's perfect. That's really good to know for next time. So let's just recap what we did. We used the mask. We were able to calculate how wide we want the stripe to be, how much seam allowance we need on the other side. Particularly the black stripe was interesting because we need the seam allowance to go over the edge of the fabric so that when we assemble this mask, the edge is going to be nicely tucked in with the top edge of the mask. The bottom edge is just going to be folded over and sewed on top. Same thing for this one. Same thing like the bottom edge here. We just have a seam allowance that just popped over the edges here, and then we're gonna glue that on here. You know what? I didn't make the strips for this, so I could do that right now, just so that next time I don't have to think about it. The less I have to think about, the better sometimes. You know, I'm sort of debating just cutting off the seam allowance, keeping this, because I know what the seam allowance... Well, but this one has a different... Alright, fine. Where is my extra piece of paper? Oh. I think I can make it work. If I just somehow manage to trace this. Alright, so if I go under here and then I mark where that is, and then I mark where this is, great, and then I raise this up, and then I mark where, oh, I need to rotate this a little more, there we go, so I mark those two pieces, and mark this piece, this piece right here, this piece right here, is that good? Yeah, that's about approximate. And then I lift up this middle piece here. There. I lift up this top piece here, right there. Alrighty. And then I just makeshift connect the dots. And I think we have our template. It's a little wider, but honestly, that's okay. If it's slightly wider than the top one, actually, I didn't think about that. It would have added a little more depth if the two lines weren't the same, but it's okay. I do not mind. I can also just scrunch it a little bit. Scrunch in here. looks pretty good. I think the edges are about the same. Oh, no. This edge is over here. Oh, that has a different angle. Oh, this is why I don't really do this process. Okay, I'll scooch this over here, and then I'll find the endpoints over here. So it's actually over here and over here. I'm gonna do that over here in a minute, but... the less I have to think about later, the better. So... I'm literally folding this edge and creating a line. Honestly, that's the best way to do it at this point. Folding the edge, creating a line. Folding this edge, creating a little line. Folding this edge, creating a little line, and then going from there. Okay, I think this one will be a little more accurate. Nice! Alright, so we'll still call this 1.0, but this will be reference for seam allowance later. This will be what I will use to cut out the interfacing. There we go. Toss the scraps. Trace this out onto the glue, but folding it over this way so that we can make more of them. So I'm just going to use this curve here. It's essentially the same, it's just slightly different, but that is okay. It should be following the same. I guess to really make sure that the curve is how I want it to be, I just cut it a line down, and I'll just cut off the excess later on. Okie dokie. Cut. Sorry, I'm not doing this on screen. Sometimes I just pull stuff really close to me so I can look really closely at it, and I don't have to, but for some reason I feel this compulsion to just be like, I'm watching you, sort of thing. Snip that. You know, now that I play that over in my head, that sounded a bit weird. Forget I said that. This sucks. It slides and I can't pin it. I don't know where it's supposed to end. There we go. Okay. There we go. Has that weird little block in the middle. There it is. Alrighty. And now we have the two pieces. Oh, just kidding. Those are really, really wide. And that's because I forgot to cut off the top. I always go too close when sewing. Yeah, it's just... I guess it's just a natural reaction to it. But sometimes you can hurt your eyes by squinting. Alrighty, so now we have this. I'm gonna go ahead and label these as orange. That way, when I stick them in a pile randomly in my box, I will know what is what. So this is orange. O-R-A-N-G-E, orange. And this will be black. Yeah, thanks. Okay. Or gray. Okay. Just measuring this, making sure that it fits. So it's actually way wider than it has to be. I will cut off the loose ends on stream. But that's it, yeah. I stopped in the middle of the recap. I'll just go over that real quickly again. So we talked all the way up to the black line up here. This has equal amount of seam allowance rather than an uneven amount of seam allowance. It's just gonna go over the mask like this. And then the next time we come back, we're actually gonna iron these on. We're gonna fold the seam allowance over. No, okay. What we're gonna do first, we're gonna iron the seam allowance flat so that it has a nice curve. We're gonna iron the glue onto the inside, and then we are going to stitch this on. The last thing we're gonna do is iron the interfacing flat on the mask. That process might change a little bit, but yeah. My throat actually hurts a little bit from talking for that long. I need to find another way of talking, probably rather than talking from my voice, because I'm nervous about explaining things. I should talk from my chest instead, and that feels a lot better. So but thank you guys for coming today. I hope this has been an interesting, at least experience, an educational experience for like what goes into the making of these masks. This one has definitely been a challenge thus far, because the ones that I made in the past were just simple cut and put, but because there's a lot more going on with these masks, such as making sure the center of these strips are glued onto the bottom of the edge, and then you're also gonna have the top stitch. There's just a lot more thinking that is involved. But yeah, thank you so much guys for being here. It's really nice to be able to explain this out loud. I think I spend a lot of time just sitting here trying to think of these things on my own, but because I'm not saying it out loud, I'm not entirely processing it, so sometimes I end up sitting at my desk for a lot longer than I have to, just trying to figure it out. But definitely trying to say it out loud and be as descriptive and distinct as I can just helps keep me moving forward. And so I look forward to the next stream. It'll probably be next Tuesday. I think I will keep a Tuesday, Thursday, 2 o'clock stream schedule. And then the second stream for that week is probably going to be a separate project. I'll probably have 2 different projects going on at the same time. Yeah, and I think what I'm gonna do tomorrow night, today's Thursday, tomorrow night is play The Evil Within. So I have decided that I will not start over with the game. So I'm sorry for those of you who like log into the stream and just don't know what the heck is going on. To be honest, I also don't know what the heck is going on because I've been skipping all of the scenes. I just want to play the game. So it'll be a lot more informal, just like having fun, playing a horror game on stream. Eventually I will choose a game and then I'll just make that a series that I'll play once a week. But for now, just because I haven't streamed games before, at least through YouTube, I will go ahead and get more comfortable by just playing a game that I've already become comfortable with. So yeah, thank you so much guys for coming. We're 13 minutes over, but that's not bad. I'm gonna go ahead and just put all this stuff away. I know, sheesh, The Evil Within is really great. I am gonna write a reminder for myself to credit Bisojo, and then remmuru in the description of this video, so that way you guys can go stock their stuff. I don't think I mentioned anyone else. Oh, also Petra Gurin. We love our resident penguin who doesn't take credit for things, so make sure you give her all the love in the world. Send her supas, write fan mail, give her all the attention, all the attention. Maybe does she deserve detention? Who knows? All the attention that she deserves. And I look forward to seeing this mask come to life. All right. I'll see you guys another time. Bye-bye.